Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Michael Ceraolo! I don't know your last name because I'm fucking this night up! Thank you for bearing with me. Yes!
I love you, man.
Well, as you mentioned, I have a book about the history of Cleveland, a book-length poems called Euclid Creek. I'm going to read some excerpts from that in a minute, but I'm going to start with a couple other poems first. Definition of consumerism. Making it a moral imperative to pay the lowest possible price for something you don't really need.
I'll buy 3 of those.
Definition of philanthropy. The giving back to the public a small fraction of what once was stolen from the public. The American dream. The sign in the store window said lotto tickets sold here, and people lined up for their chance to buy the dream. If Marie Antoinette had only had the foresight to say, let them buy lottery tickets. Late night TV watching. The old test pattern has ridden off into the sunset. Now, the heavens are filled with pictures and noise coming to and from Earth at all hours. Now, the store never closes. Every program ever produced can now be found in some window of this bizarre bazaar. The commercials come camouflaged as entertainment. Health, wealth, wisdom, companionship, sex, gadgets galore, and even God are sold shamelessly. Just call a toll-free number. Have ready your plastic passport to this strange country. No CODs, please. The nation is now more familiar with the works of Slim Whitman than it is with those of Walt. Now, the rest will be from Euclid Creek. June 22nd, 1969. All hail John D. Rockefeller. Glory to Goodrich and Goodyear and the rest of the rubber barons. Hosannas to George Hewlett. Thanks and praise to Samuel Mather. Amen to Marcus Alonzo Hanna. On this date, Mother Earth revealed these men to be not the gods of industrial greatness they were worshipped as, but the generals of a raping and pillaging army. And she sent a subtle sign of warning to the world, a flow of fire floating on top of a river. The uneasy coexistence. The 4, 6, and 8-legged crawling and flying people and the finned and flippered swimming people greatly outnumber and outvote me here as they do everywhere. But theirs is no tyranny of the majority, for they are respectful of minority rights, and it would surely be a sacrilege for a non-oppressed minority to attempt a coup by trying to impose the doctrine of might makes right. And so they and I have entered into a non-aggression pact. But outside the park, there remains the uneasy coexistence with the 2-legged people. The crows, with the ancestral memories of the forest encoded in their genes, waiting by the side of the freeway for the rush hours to end so that they can feast on the squirrel who played chicken with the cars and lost. And the groundhog, celebrated one day of the year, ignored or reviled the rest of the year, lying squashed at the edge of the road. And a rabbit who has escaped from that green cage we call a park and wandered into someone's backyard, where it sits sucking nourishment through the stem of a dandelion as though sipping through a straw, thankful that no one has put poison on the plant. And a different rabbit, or maybe the same one, hopping frenetically with only its tail visible as the swirling late-season snow falls to its doom, giving the illusion of a moving snowball as it struggles to find food. And a raccoon, poisoned for having the audacity to eat what the humans didn't even want anymore. And bees and wasps and hornets, exterminated for attacking those who tried to destroy their homes. The robin lying belly up in the driveway, having sampled the seed stuck in the spilled oil. And another bird, despondent over the destruction of its home in the name of development, committing suicide by a kamikaze dive into the grill of a moving car. And the homeless skunk, driven into the diurnal world by the breaking of its biological clock, wandering with the eyes of an unmedicated schizophrenic, finally lying down, seizing, and dying. And the deer, who refuse to keep their population near extinction levels, who refuse to remain constrained on the reservation to which they had been consigned, who refuse to refrain from eating grass and shrubs, and hence blaspheme the ideal of human property values, and were thus sentenced to be executed, several hundred strong, although the execution was given a nicer sounding scientific name. Nothing new here, unfortunately, for this is one of those times where the events don't read any better now as history than they did at the time as news, if indeed they were even noticed as news. It was just a century or so ago that the last of the passenger pigeons was killed. And just a century or so before that elk and bear and wild turkey and other animals were hunted almost to extinction by the first white settlers in the area, the animals having recolonized the area after being driven away and overhunted by the earlier natives. And so it goes in boom and bust cycles back to the days of the final retreat of the ice sheet, when some of the animals followed the tundra as it moved away from the area, and the grizzly bears and caribou and bison and some species of muskox and voles and a couple of kinds of lemmings saved themselves by moving away, for they still live today, though not in the Euclid Creek area. But other animals were not so lucky. Peccaries and beavers the size of bears, and the ferocious carnivorous short-faced bear, and a species of moose, and a species of deer, and a species of muskox now exist only in the imagination, as do the woolly mammoth and the Jefferson mammoth and the mastodon, all done in by the sinister synergy of changing climate and the appearance of fierce hunters, the first humans to see Euclid Creek. October 20th, 1944. It was a Friday afternoon, a little after lunch, nearly 3 years into the war effort, a little less than 10 months before Hiroshima would explode into the public's consciousness, a day when it seemed that the war had come to Cleveland. Around 2:30 p.m., there was heard what witnesses described as thunder, probably the gas tanks cracking and then starting to leak, followed first by the formation of a vapor cloud, and then by an explosion that sent tsunamis of fire 100 feet tall crashing down on the surrounding area, devastating a square mile of the urban landscape, sending manhole covers soaring skyward, razing to rubble a couple of factories, destroying nearly 80 neighboring homes, tossing cars around like kids playing jacks. The explosion pushed the war news below the fold, or at least into less bold type, for the next several days, as the ripple effects of the explosion began to be felt, from factories unable to remain in operation due to a lack of gas, to a temporary bread shortage because of a lack of fuel to fire the bakery ovens. The death toll continued to climb daily as the rubble was slowly dug out and further devastation discovered, the toll reaching a final toll of 130. Things gradually quieted down and slowly returned to their normal absurdity until by the next weekend, just 8 or 9 days after the explosion, crowds of at least 50,000 people gathered to gawk at the rubble free of charge. Naming. The people in power proclaim the power to name, usually honoring heroes of one's own ethnicity. But the migrations of a massively mobile people, while commonly covered in euphemism, produce the increasing incongruities seen today. Kosciuszko and Pulaski Avenues. Nowadays, African Americans live on streets named for the Polish patriots who helped the revolutionary slaveholders achieve independence. Balfour, Gladstone, and Halifax roads. The Anglophilic town founders have fled, leaving the later arriving African Americans to live, in intended irony, on streets named after colonial masters. And yet, worse than names that honor the wrong people are the names that honor no one. And those are in the majority. For in 1906, the city founders decided, for ease and efficiency in that era that venerated efficiency, to designate the streets with numbers. Bring back Case and Water and Merwin and Bank and Erie and all the others submerged under numbers. January 30th, 1931. The mania for the new stadium continued apace. Construction would keep going, no matter what the weather. And Thomas Kelly and John Last, working high on a scaffolding, were victimized in the vicious wind. A guy wire holding a 120-foot tower snapped, and the two plunged to their deaths. And like one of those surrealistic scenes from a Buster Keaton movie, the tower fell right between other workers without injuring anyone else. And some project manager pushed the mania further. Speaking of the incident, it will not delay work. And the mouthpiece of the managerial class maintained this was an acceptable level of civilian casualties. And sadly, they were proven right. And the new millennium dawned dangerously for this creek. 100% impaired, said a report, when the babble of bureaucrat speak was translated into plain language. And impairment was not enough for some. They wanted to go much further. The Ohio Environmental Council sees little technical merit, necessity, or social and economic justification for the damage to the Euclid Creek watershed that will be caused by First Interstate Properties Limited's proposal to build a 67-acre office and retail mall on the property currently owned by TRW adjacent to Euclid Creek. OEC, therefore, asked that the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency deny the 401 water quality certification for this project. And it went on. The threats to aquatic life and water quality from the First Interstate project threatens to curtail the marginal improvements Euclid Creek has made. Greater runoff, more flooding, more pollution, A 50-year flood becomes a 7-year flood, a 100-year flood, a 12-year flood, and so on, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. And there was TRW, the egregious embodiment of that oxymoron corporate citizen, who had moved their headquarters to the headwaters of the watershed less than 20 years earlier, abandoning the community downstream for no discernible reason, at least that they would state publicly, acting the spoiled child, threatening to take its ball and go home if the real citizens didn't accede to its wishes. Vote may determine if TRW stays, CEO says, screamed a newspaper headline during the campaign. But defying common language comprehension, I don't want that to be viewed as a threat. However, leaving is always an option, and we might just sell the whole kit and caboodle because there is no compelling reason for TRW to be in Cleveland. Not 100 years of history, not many millions in legalized bribery given to you. And 9 of the 13 elected officials, 7 council, 5 school board, 1 mayor, approved the project and its purported benefits. An update to the old adage, there are lies, damn lies, and studies of the benefits of economic development paid for by those who stand to benefit most. 2 officials were opposed to the project not out of concern for environmental impact, but because they favored development in a different direction. And the other 2 officials were hiding under their desks until the campaign was over. During which campaign, TRW spent $600,000, and our elected officials were the mouthpieces of TRW. And the absurdity of artificial boundaries was apparent, although nowhere remarked upon, except here. Citizens in most communities in the watershed would have no voice in the outcome. Only the residents of the one community got to vote on the matter, and they would reap any alleged benefits while foisting the problems on those further downstream. And even with all that, the project won by less than 100 votes out of over 9,000 cast. And to celebrate the first anniversary of their triumph, TRW plans to close valve plant, screamed another newspaper headline about the plant downstream in the watershed. But even that was preparatory to the grand announcement, timed around the celebration of the 4th of July, that TRW would close its headquarters after all. Even though they had gotten their way, they would take their ball and go away.
He's sucking cancer sticks back there.
I'm sorry.
You can do what you want, but don't mess with my dick.
You mean fit?
Are you
Like
at it?
fit? Huh? That's what I had.
Huh?
Huh?
It's shaking. It's
Trying to leave other people's neck alone.
All right, let's give it up for Michael and Don. Come on! Fucking bastards. You are not losers. You are losers.